I'd like to welcome to the stage the final part of this morning's Transmedia Trends track here at Beyond Games. And this is going to be a panel moderated by Sensor Tower's Craig Chapple, formerly of this parish. So we go way back. Craig, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, thank you for joining us for this. This is great. And I know that you're also moderating our guided breakout groups every evening. So you did the first one of those yesterday. Thank you for that. We've got Neil Gibson from TPub Comics, Joseph Knowles from Rovio, Erinrose Sullivan back from Sullivan Digital Twins, who was here yesterday, and Ken Martin from GreenPark Esports to talk about Innovate or Die. Do we have to give up on tradition in order to succeed in the future? Once you're all in and you can all hear me okay, I'll hand over to Craig to lead the charge there. And then, folks, if you have any questions for this panel, do feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at the end of at the bottom of the Zoom window. And Craig, you can either grab them from there, you know the drill, or I'll just pop back in sort of 30, 40 minutes time and help you work through those, whatever works best. Okay, so over to you guys.
Great, thanks, Dave. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining in this session, and thanks to the panelists for joining in this. Throughout this, if you want to pop a question, just put it into the Q&A. And we'll either bring it up during the panel or bring it up right at the end. So the panel today is quite an extreme title, Innovate or Die. Do we have to give up on tradition in order to succeed in the future? So we're going to really discuss how transmedia and the metaverse influence creation methods. So first up, I'll introduce the panel. So there's myself, Craig Chapple from Sensor Tower. I'm the mobile insight strategist there. Just do analysis on mobile games. Yeah, as Dave said, I was previously with PocketGamer.biz. I'm well versed in the events here. But more importantly, we've got an excellent panel here. We've got Neil Gibson from TPub Comics, Joseph Knowles from Rovio, Erinrose Sullivan from Surreal Digital Twins, and Ken Martin from GreenPark Sports. But I'll let you do proper intros for yourselves so people can kind of get an idea of what it is you're doing. So perhaps Erinrose, if you want to kick us off with an intro.
Sure. So I'm Erinrose. I'm based in Switzerland. I've been in and around gaming for about 20 years, in companies like Ubisoft and EA, and working with numerous companies around the world in strategy, consumer insight, and marketing. Currently, I work with a company based here in Switzerland, a startup called So Real, where we create 4D plus digital twins. So riggable objects for gaming, for entertainment, but equally for cultural heritage museum, which is what I focus on with them, and retail, to go right into the metaverse, to go through VR, through any point for the future.
Great, thanks. And Ken?
Hi, my name is Ken Martin. I'm from GreenPark Sports, based in LA. What time is it now? 4:30. It's early. And so we're building a metaverse for sports fans. And when I say sport, both esports and traditional sports. My other two co-founders, Chad Hurley, who co-founded YouTube, and Nick Swinburne, who founded Zappos, the three of us got together, looking at how to engage a new generation of fans that aren't necessarily watching games the same way and want to have more of a role, more agency in how they show their fandom and compete. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so early. Great time to talk about Metaverse at 4:30 in the morning. And Neil, if you can intro yourself.
Sure. My name is Neil Gibson. I work with TPub Comics. We're based here in London, and we're publishing comics. Our mission is to get more people reading and creating comics. And there is some crossover with games, but I'm the sort of wild card on this panel, I think.
Really interesting to kind of get insights outside of the bubble is the games industry. And Joseph?
Yeah, I'm a writer and narrative designer at Rovio. We're mostly, I think, known for the Birds franchise, but we work on other IPs as well. I'm working on a new narrative-driven puzzle game called Supernatural City, and that is in soft launch in a handful of countries right now. And prior to that, I was a journalist and a filmmaker and communicator, and I have a lot of experience outside of games before getting into the games industry about 6 years ago. Yeah, happy to be here, and thanks for this looks like a good talk.
Thanks, and very much looking forward to Supernatural City. Looks amazing.
Cheers.
So I guess the first kind of really obvious question, just to kind of kick things off, is, you know, when we're talking about transmedia and the metaverse, what is it we're actually talking about? So what is transmedia? What is the metaverse, and kind of how do they differ? So perhaps Erinrose, maybe.
Well, I guess I see transmedia, and again, I hope this doesn't contradict everything's been discussed, like that's sort of like that content and how a type of content lives across experiences, and how you create that network of that type of content. However, it's, you know, customizable, personalizable, you know, user generated, but creating a thread for narratives in a relevant manner across the multiple platforms. Where I see sort of metaverse is sort of where, you know, a place where types of content can live in a very sort of dynamic capacity. And equally, when we talk about the metaverse, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules, because sort of like its definition, one thing is defining it, or in these sort of limited terms of how we're defining it based on like a book or story from, you know, years ago, to the sort of investments happening now, to actually the way people will engage. We're sort of on the beginning of a learning curve.
I know, Neil, you had some interesting thoughts about transmedia compared to my thoughts on it, but I thought it was really interesting. If you wanted to share some of that.
Under pressure now, because I can't remember what I said to you.
Yeah. So it was really interesting. So my thoughts of transmedia was, it's almost kind of laughed off in some ways in the past, at least in the industry. I know as a journalist, it certainly was not always an easy topic to broach, but your thoughts were, we kind of, isn't transmedia just kind of what Disney and that are doing?
I think so. I think transmedia has been around for many, many decades. When I was a kid, I watched Knight Rider, and then when I first went to the library, oh, there was a book on Knight Rider, so I read that. And it's happened in Star Wars with comics, and the narrative goes across many different mediums, and now you have audiobooks and podcasts and everything. I think it's never going to go away. Having the evolution of transmedia into the metaverse, that's something that I'd never really considered before, but that is something that's definitely happening, and people controlling it within their own areas, which, well, I guess that's what this panel is for. I think that's a very dangerous thing, but maybe it's a natural thing for companies to want to do. But to me, I just focus on transmedia as in the previous panel. If you like the characters and contents and story, can you digest it in different ways? And people have their own preferences. Some people prefer games, some people prefer video, some people prefer TV, some people prefer books or comics.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if Ken or Joseph, you have any other thoughts about kind of how we're kind of framing what the metaverse and transmedia are?
Well, I think we have a shared understanding. At least that's my understanding as well. I think that the thing that there is a kind of a core difficulty here, though, and the company I work for has some experience with this as well. Is that okay? So you have, as Neil was saying, you have an IP, and some people like to engage in the IP via a game, via a book, or via a movie. But these are all very different businesses, and it's actually really, extremely dangerous to try to manage all these as one business, and quite difficult. But the consumer demand is still there. Like making games is a very specific discipline that requires a certain skill sets, and so is films and so on. But at the end, the end user doesn't really see it that way. Angry Birds is Angry Birds. Star Trek is Star Trek, and whatever IP you're looking at. So what you need, I think the real key here is brand management. It's how do you really, I think it's one of the most important roles in entertainment today is how do you manage a coherent brand across all these different industries, not just sort of formats or streams, like whole scale different industries with different requirements and different needs. And what makes sense for a character to do something in a video game may not make much sense for a character to do that in a film. I think there are no easy answers to how to manage that, but I do think that really paying attention to foundational kind of narrative fundamentals can help avoid some of these traps and pitfalls. Having just a really solid core narrative basis for the IP, so that it makes sense no matter how you deploy. But that's easier said than done, of course.
I think things have certainly got better with games being transferred to film, and perhaps even the other way around.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it used to be notorious,
And poor, like when you had films transferred to games, that like there were very few good examples of that. I mean, 20 years ago, you were like, oh my gosh, every time it was like painful. It was sort of like this natural licensing process. It was very clunky and it just didn't really fit.
Yeah.
So I think interesting, kind of expanding on that, is how are you all thinking about the metaverse and transmedia from your respective industries or parts of the industry? So Ken, you're doing a lot with like sports and esports. So what are you doing there, and how are you kind of thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting because the narrative that we're trying to augment is essentially what's happening in real life. There's a narrative playing out in a non-fictional manner with sport, and we're taking the data from that and essentially channeling that into more of a visceral kind of physical, tangible kind of space in a virtual world. And really it's for the purposes of giving the fans their own role alongside of that, as opposed to taking all of the data that typically comes out of sport and funneling it into essentially a spreadsheet, which is more or less fantasy sports betting and so forth. We can bring that to life. And so finding that formula, which is kind of what we're experimenting with, is what kind of different episodic overlay could be applied towards what's happening in the real world, but with the sports fans basically competing against each other in kind of a fantastical realm of sorts. How do those interplay? And so the way that we look at kind of a metaverse concept is really, again, a kind of an overlay over sort of time and space, because it is a very event-driven kind of through line. But then it's really doors and windows. Like we see sort of the ability of this space to allow ownership. You come in with a certain love of a team, and you bring that into this world. And our goal is to create that in an authentic manner, but then allow you to cosplay and expand that world. So there's that creation part within that. So it's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know, Neil, if you've got any thoughts about kind of how other industries are thinking about like transmedia or the metaverse, or maybe even then not thinking about things like the metaverse.
Well, I can't really speak much about the metaverse as well as the other speakers, but from a personal note, the transmedia thing comes back to what Joseph said about brand management, because, and this goes both ways, but so if the owner of the IP, you want everything to be good in that medium, and people and consumer won't care that it was done well as a game or done well as a video. They just like the characters and the brand. But because of me, comics is very niche, and some people never read them, and if they pick it up for the first time and it's terrible, they may think all comics are terrible. And that really is painful for me. So I really do care about transmedia that has to be done well in its own environment. And as Joseph said, it's very hard because you don't know other different disciplines and what's good in that discipline. And finding the right people to trust it is difficult. And that to me is the biggest challenge of transmedia.
Yeah, I think have you signed like a few deals for that as well, like for games into comics and things like that?
We have. We've actually rejected one person because they wanted everyone to be, they didn't want a bad guy at all. They wanted it all to be positive and good. And like, there's no conflict here, there's no tension. And I just thought it's not worth the effort with this brand, which is rather large, to get it right, because I won't be happy with the end product. And I was also torn because if I don't do it, maybe someone else will do what they want and make it terrible. But I ended up, just for my own mental health, I thought, I'm not dealing with this. I'm not going to produce something I'm not happy with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how different the industries are and the content is when it comes to kind of crossing over. And I think that kind of happens when you have licenses coming into games, and how the difficulties are trying to make that game match what the film's doing. And then the other way around, as we were saying, that you've had some kind of terrible films, but that's because they're trying to fit maybe exactly what the game is into a film, or trying to ditch everything about the game to make that film. So it kind of ends up.
The film, there's so many people have their fingerprints on it. So there's always all these tiny changes, and it drives the main creator crazy. And it's a whole minefield. I know that from my personal experience.
Maybe the future there is to kind of put I guess this is a dream world, but to put more of the responsibility into the hands of the creator and kind of let them. Am I wrong? I think that's what Marvel kind of did with a lot of the films. They kind of give the creators a lot of.
They had brilliance with Kevin Feige. I've always don't know how to pronounce his name. He totally understands the character, the universe, and brilliant storytelling all linked together. That was great. But there was still studio interference. What happened with Joss Whedon on the Avengers 2? You're always going to have a battle between the money men and the creatives, always. And you need both of them, because you can have the best thing ever, and it's critically acclaimed, doesn't make money, and it's still a business. So you need to have both elements. But getting the right partnership, building the right team that you can trust each other is very hard. I don't have the solution for it. Maybe Ken does.
Pass the baton on to you, Ken.
Where's I got it right here. No, it's super interesting, because I think I guess one of the things that we're also, it's similar in some respects. If you look at a lot of games today, everybody's really trying to achieve this cross-play, multiplay, right, where we can all be on different platforms. And so rather than the storyline purely existing in different form factors, now you have essentially different modalities all occurring in the same space. So you might have somebody coming into a world through a mobile phone, but you have another person coming into the world via, let's say, VR as an example. And the different form factors, give them, there's just natural different interaction abilities, and you can't give everyone the same role. So as you start to think through an environment and a story, even beyond what we're doing, I find it fascinating that you have to start to think, well, what does the form factor dictate as far as how that player might want to naturally engage in that world? A VR player would have different interactions than a mobile player, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to start to create new ways of how participants can play in the same world, and it starts getting weird overlays.
I'd also build on what Ken was saying, to the point of content, and that we talked about fan fiction when we were offline last week. Goodness gracious. And I think it's really important to consider when somebody, is close to something, that ownership of it, and sort of that limit between, content's creator and then the fans sort of engagement with it. And that's been really hard for the gaming industry. Like, it's only in the past year, about 10 years, where like this more user generated content and allowing a little bit of the reins, control in that. And I think, even to go beyond games, and we think about the metaverse, and you think, okay, now we're used to kind of adapting things, or like working with others and playing with others. Now, we talked previously, like, okay, going into the metaverse, taking these concepts and actually applying it to our work, applying it to how we connect on various things. And what's even been interesting, like I talk with even game companies in HR, and they have like employees, because we've all become hybrid and we're almost kind of in this virtual space of working together, that even how we work is almost more shared in the way we do gaming. So you sort of have this kind of, and then even, it'd say, oh, well, I'm really good at this. And then, but I have a friend that's good at that. So I let him do this work, even though he doesn't have this job, but he's kind of doing that, and I'm helping him with that. So there's all of a sudden this kind of hybridness, fluidity happening through having, engaged with content, through collaborating, through fun. I know I was kind of taking this into a different space, but like I think so many worlds are kind of combining that's coming upon us.
I think it was interesting yesterday in the guided breakout chat about the metaverse. Someone was saying, I can't remember who it was now, that we're kind of in like it's almost like or maybe you said this, Joseph. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. We're in like almost like a manual input of the metaverse kind of already. So and maybe like the last year has kind of put that into fast forward, and now we're all connecting over virtually, which actually makes things a lot more seamless and easier, and we're all doing it in a virtual space. So perhaps we're kind of already getting there, even on the content creation side or just the communication side as well. This is quite interesting to me. Sorry, Joseph, I can't remember if
no, I don't remember. I don't think I said that, but I have. I don't know. I'll take credit anyway. exactly. Zoom is the metaverse, yeah. And this reminds me, I attended my niece's birthday party, Animal Crossing, and it was marvelous. Because we were not able to travel and with the pandemic, and I think a lot of people attended various virtual events this way, and yeah, I think this our experience the past 14 months has probably accelerated certain trends in that regard. But to return to the question, how are like metaverse considerations impacting like decisions about like creating stuff in the first place? Like I'm working on this this mobile game, and when I'm writing it, honestly, I am not thinking about anyone but the player of the game. I don't have one eye on a wider universe of transmedia ambitions in various different media. However, I do think that because my first priority is to make a really great game and make something that everyone wants to play and that people can connect with, and it's important to recognize that the mobile format the mobile game format is different from other formats, and not every thing is going to work for every format. So, however, that being said, the thing about storytelling in free-to-play mobile games is that you have to have almost unlimited content. You have to have an inexhaustible story premise, because these games are built to be long-lasting services. They're not just something you can finish in a few hours and put down and go, that was nice. It's this like thing that goes on, and it becomes a habit for you. So to do that, you really need to sort of build kind of a deep world, and with a lot of lore and a lot of characters and a lot of things going on and a certain logic to it. Something that can be inexhaustible for quite some time. And when you do that, I think you create an engine that can survive in other media. You can create a sort of story engine, if you will. There's other uses for that term, but that will help the IP live and breathe in other media. And it's of course it's also really helpful, when we when we do marketing and user acquisition for the game, that we have this ready-made universe of stuff to draw on and material to draw on, and it's very character driven, and not so much focused on individual little story arcs, although we have those, but what people come back for over and over again are the characters. So I think just the process of world building for a free-to-play story-driven game kind of lends itself to right, Supernatural is only going to be there's only plans for it to be a game, but who knows what happens later. But if I think part of planning for success is I think we have a rich enough world, I think, that it could conceivably survive in some other media, but that's certainly not my intention when I'm writing. I think we have to keep an eye on the ball. When you're at the plate, you got to look at the pitcher and you got to look at the ball. You can't look at stands where you want to hit it, So, sorry, American baseball reference.
Joseph, I think that's very interesting. I think you're absolutely right that if you're making it the game, you should focus on the gamers, absolutely. But the fact that you've made your story so vast that it can go on almost indefinitely is very interesting to me, because then if it was to be adapted to any other medium, with it being that large, do you have a preference of what it would focus on? Or would you go, well, if you're the expert in your medium, what's your proposal to me?
Well, I think I would. I mean, if this were my vision, and if I were pursuing this, I would probably try to educate myself on what the options were and what it would really look like. And I would listen to an expert like you and say, tell me what would a comic, what would you like to do as a comics artist? And first tell me, how do you understand this IP? What feelings do you have about this IP? What emotions is it engendering you when you play the game? And how use that as a starting point for what you would do in the comic. I would try to, bring it back to, to the pillars of what the IP is about and what the characters are about. That might be that, but then even starting from that point, it might still take us to quite a different direction in the comic, and that would be okay. But of course, this is a purely hypothetical discussion, but I think that's how I would approach it.
It's interesting you say that. There's, and it's absolutely, when you have creation, there's like that inspiration that happens in that. And it's almost the way that then how, once that's in place, how that bounces off audiences. And in certain ways you can't predict that. And that's sort of also where kind of sort of a type of magic happens, and like surprise happens, of the way in which that ownership of that world or those stories that you create is quite, and that it almost can create this loop of inspiration as well. Or there's certain things that you're like, oh crap, it wasn't intended this way. What do we do now? Which can also be, a type of change or, an opportunity as well.
I was thinking, we kind of touched upon this, but how much do we really need to innovate in the content that is being created when it comes to kind of the future and going into transmedia or the metaverse? I think I remember, Joseph, you had some interesting opinions on, like, for example, what's going on in the match 3 puzzle space and where there's innovation and where there's not, but how both are perfectly reasonable and successful kind of approaches.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, the title of this panel, it sounds almost threatening, innovate or die, and as if we're going to be, conducting executions here on camera. This is not even innovative enough, guys. I'm sorry, I'm
try not to you all vote in the
Seriously, it's like the days of Rome. My God.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, this year there are in the match 3 puzzle space. I mean, it is an extremely crowded, extremely competitive marketplace. In free to playable games, I don't think there's a bloodier pool than the match 3 game. But it's still, as a category, as a product category, growing, and plenty of companies are still having success in that space. And two new games in this space came out this year or late last year, but they're both kind of being talked a lot about. One is very innovative, I think, by London-based studio called Transmedia Games. They made a game called Love and Pies, and that is doing some really interesting things. Really very, very closely tying the narrative of the game to the core puzzle action in a way that I haven't really seen done before on such a scale and in a free-to-play puzzle game. And the other game that is sort of dominating a lot of conversations is a game called Royal Match by a Turkish developer, Beam Games, founded by some guys who used to work at Peak. And they made a game called Royal Match, which it's lovely. It's a very nice game. I would not, it's not innovative, at least, I mean, to any real definition of innovation. I mean, it's a very conservative game with, but where it excels and where it's really different is that it just has really refined core puzzle mechanics. Just like everything about the speed, the kind of like little small quality of life improvements in the puzzle gameplay, and it's actually just really pleasurable to play. Like, they have really just taken the existing match 3 game and just have made the ultimate iteration on it. And both of these games, one from a sort of innovation point of view is quite conservative, and the other one is quite new and interesting. But they're both finding a measure of success, and I think so. So I think maybe the question isn't so much innovate or die. It's more like just identify the areas where you really think you can innovate and can bring something new to the table, because and really define the scope, because I think there's a lot of innovative games and a lot of innovative ideas out there, that lose lots and lots of money, and they're very, you know, most if you to shift the discussion to like venture capital, for example, most VCs will spread their bets knowing that most of their investments will not pan out, but a few do, and that's what makes it worth it. So, but it is very risky innovating, and when you're in a really competitive space like match 3, like you got to be careful. Where are you taking those risks? Are you really certain about what you want to, define the areas that you want to take it, where you think you can do something different, and then define the areas where you want to follow best practice.
Like Ken and Erinrose, it seems like the businesses that you're working in have to be innovative. So I wonder if you can explain, how innovative do you need to be in kind of the areas that you're working in? Is it something new that you're doing? And explain.
Well, so for SoReal, we take CT scanners, which are systems that have been around for decades, but in fact it's a new way of using it, and so and sort of like that look back of like, how can we readapt or adapt technologies that exist, or look at things differently and imagine them differently for the future. So that's sort of like an example of that, of taking an existing technology and actually building upon that to do something quite different by creating objects for digital worlds, for for immersive experiences, for even for industries where you're gonna you can't turn off the electrical grid, but you need to be testing. So they actually created in a virtual world, and you actually can have the technology in the virtual objects to do that experimentation that you can't do in the real world. So, I mean, these are, as we get into the metaverse and these immersive experiences, like, it's really limitless what's possible. And hence, as I've said earlier, there's like billions and billions and billions are being invested here that, it's not even really much out there in the media, but there's so much that's going to be happening, and we're really at the tip of it. And we don't know even the form it's really going to take shape, because so many factors, and we're going to be like kind of some sort of odd sailing ship going into it. And in 2 years' time, we'll be talking completely differently about the metaverse, as I'm sure Ken can elaborate upon.
Yeah, it's funny, we use a theme park a lot as kind of an analogy, because we there's things to Joseph's point that don't really need to be reinvented, and in some cases they just potentially need a different presentation. There's in Disneyland over here, there's there's a ride where they took a roller coaster and they put it in the dark and put a mountain over top of it, and it's no longer a roller coaster, it's Space Mountain. And there's a story and there's a form factor there that people just love roller coasters, so why change that? Just a new way of presenting it. Whereas you can have a new experience that is completely immersive or interactive in a new form factor, that people are also looking for something different. So I think we go back to human needs, where it's like there's a human need for predictability and there's a human need for surprise, and you have to counterbalance that within that realm. And so when we look at an environment where you want to acclimate, you want to have the familiar so that you know how to navigate that space, but you need essentially that spontaneity within that world that beckons you to try something new. And I think that balance for different profiles of gamers is tricky. It's where you get into more of the casual player, into the mid and sort of the hardcore. And yeah, if you were to innovate everything, I think you would die. So I think it's a trap. So you gotta find the right blend.
I think Sid Meier, who made the Civilization series of games, he said that every new iteration was a rule of 3. A third of it would be exactly the same, a third of it tweaks to the system, and a third of it completely new.
Yeah, I mean, even in sports games, if you look at what EA's been doing with Madden and FIFA, and it's kind of very similar every year, except obviously there's new content in a sense by way of the players.
And it's again, it's a couple. It's sort of like ultimately with something like FIFA, it's the audience and their engagement and that connection through so it's that balance between the experience, that realism of having all those players, and it's up to the moment, but having talking smack, connection through competition, really that fine line running right through that for that audience.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things I wanted to ask is, again, we mentioned it a bit earlier, was how important is user-generated content becoming, and what are the opportunities and challenges here? I think Erinrose, you mentioned about user-generated content.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I think after, this past year, we've seen, bottlenecks with content from all the, we had such a desire for play around the world for people to, connect. World Health Organization promoting it after a year earlier, saying it was an addictive sort of pastime, and this need for more content that, the opportunity for the players to be creators, and seeing something like Roblox, and not only are they creators, they're actually they're miniature developing studios form there, with now actual publishers publishing in there, and beyond, I would say beyond content creation, there are designers in there. They're like probably the next Chanel will come from, like Kathy Hackles says, the next Chanel might come from Roblox. So these are like these spaces of creation that are happening of user generated content, which is really exciting, and allows for that collaboration, exposition, and trial and test. So and so important to keep something alive. But it creates constraints, as Neil knows, and you all know with Disney, like wanting to get the rules around these brands, and holding it like in their their cold dead hands. It's going to be a big challenge. It'll continue to be a challenge in these spaces.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go for it. No, I was just going to say that it's interesting because in our space, it's hard to know exactly what UGC looks like. Like Animal Crossing, you mentioned, Joseph. There's a lot of a design component that is being explored right now in the UGC space. But at the same time, I guess the way I look at it is there's conscious and then subconscious UGC. the subconscious side of it is essentially it's starting to change based upon the choices that you're kind of making, but the environment kind of being more personalized. So there's kind of personalization on one side, where the environment is learning you versus you having to learn it, and so it feels hyper personalized. And I would imagine in a storyline where you're trying to create an environment where the choices of the player continue to evolve, and it's and the narrative becomes somewhat quite unique to their pathway, that there's a complexity in what is in and out of the right versus wrong of that character, or how they might act, or how the story needs to be dictated. But then on the other side, there's very kind of direct and conscious UGC where you are actually free form creating. And I think there's a lot of experimentation in both sides. I think some players want to be able to like rip the head off of one thing and stick it on another thing and completely change the rules because that's what you can do in the virtual world. But others are like, no, you can't do that. That's not right. And so it's interesting how different properties are kind of allowing people to kind of mix things that were not normal before. So I'm just curious, obviously with Rovio and Neil, like I guess, are there hard lines in how you guys are looking at what is acceptable within sort of the lore of something? And
this has to go to Joseph because it's not, this is
well,
so it's all for Joseph.
Yeah.
I don't have kind of like a brand management or policing role at Rovio, so maybe I'm not the best person to answer that either. But I think like, but what we're talking about is the player space. Like every game has a player space, and sometimes that player space is really expansive, and sometimes it's quite limited, and there are good games that make use of a very expansive player space and really depend on the players to generate a lot of the content, and there are other games that don't, and I think they both success. But I mean, like I think I for example, I've been like watching Star Trek since I was a little boy, right? And it's a franchise that's gone on forever. Now there has been this like underground fan community of Star Trek, like since the 70s, making underground comments in fan fiction, and a lot of the stuff, it was like they just didn't want to know, right? Like they let it go on, probably because they had no resources to stop it. They didn't care because it was the 70s and they didn't realize they had a big thing, yet. But like, oh, weird show we did in the 60s, people are still writing about that. Okay, whatever, but then, they realize, Star Wars becomes a hit, and they realize that they have this space franchise, and the 80s come around, and suddenly they the people managing Star Trek need to like look at what the fans are doing, and it's quite interesting to see how they have like knowingly winked at that kind of like process, while not, because they their lawyers won't let them sanction it outright, so they but over the years you have seen various concepts and storylines that emerged in fan fiction in the 70s show up in like the recent Star Trek shows, and it's quite and the most notoriously the homoerotic relationship between Kirk and Spock has now been really they've finally kind of really like very really embraced the bromance side, I think, now in latter
Some
day
of the
Star
fan
Trek.
art of that is rather disturbing.
Yeah. So but like, I don't know, I mean, I think some brands are braver than others about what goes on out there, but I think like Angry Birds has a very magnificent and wonderful fan community, and I think they are it's of course I'm speaking as myself here, not on behalf of Rovio, but I personally think that they are they're I mean that's the goal of that keeps the brand going. I mean, like the fact that there's this enthusiasm, and that there are these forms and subcultures, and I think it's great that this is ultimately the brand is going to live in players' minds, and sooner or later you have to go, because that's where it's that's its destiny.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is something that is unique to games, though. So, for example, for Angry Birds, fans can design their own levels, as it were, or they can come up with ideas for different types of birds. That's what they can do. But if you look at like films, for example, they don't want fan-made films normally, because the quality is normally not good enough.
Yeah,
it takes away from the main product they're making. With comics, you get either fan art or fan fiction, and 99% of it is terrible. But some people actually, they make a career out of it, because they make such good art, and they go and take it to Marvel or DC, and they go, this is great, and they can draw it that way. That there's a way for them to get in, but it doesn't actually help the core product, as it were. Whereas it might do. I think it certainly doesn't games. I think it's just different from media.
How about
I think if
I was just going to say, remember the movie Time Rewind?
Yeah.
And when films all got deleted? And they do that, where all the movies, they all got radiated, so the guys remake the movies. It's almost fan fiction movies, and everybody in the community gets involved in making the movies, like Ghostbusters. It's with Jack Black. Hysterical, but it's kind of like, yes, a no budget remaking, and actually the love of a community getting involved, and like that closeness to a brand, like with no quality to it. Of course, it's a movie about making movies, but like that love of things can create, or that movie about like the little boys redoing Rambo, like there's this kind of way of like that love for something that shows it's less about the quality of the thing, but the passion behind it, I think, is something to reflect as well. Like that can get far with a passion, with a crappy little, your iPhone 2 or something.
So I think we're going to have to wrap up some of this panel there. We can jump into a Q&A. So we might have answered this one a bit earlier, almost accidentally, but we had a question that is transmedia always a way to explore stories and characters in other manners, or did it become a strong marketing tool, or both?
Both. I think that's quite obvious. It's definitely a marketing tool, a way of licensing it out. Like I've seen Angry Birds stereos, right? So definitely it's there for marketing, and then also you can carry on the story afterwards in other ways. Like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that got cancelled because Sarah Michelle Gellar wanted to stop. She'd done it for 7 years, and she was a bit burnt out. But the fans are crazy for the story, and so then they've done they've done season 8 and season 9, I think even season 10 of the comics, just carrying on the story.
Oh wow, I had no idea about that. That's amazing.
Everyone should.
I'll now be looking for these these comics. Someone said Star Trek Continues was an amazing fan continuation of the original series as well. So,
yeah. I'm actually not altogether familiar with everything, like, but didn't like they even found like some of the old actors and stuff came in and you know, who had like all supporting roles earlier, they come in and were involved with the fan made series. Yeah, I guess that was
and yeah, so and then the other question, I'm trying to apologies if I don't understand the question properly. So how do we solve the problem of a saturated marketplace when the means of transport in the future has to be mobile devices? So my understanding of that question is, for example, say we have the metaverse, but the main input is mobile. So what challenges does that kind of bring up? I'm sorry if I'm making up the question now, but like with interface, and then how do you design around that? If that makes sense.
I mean, I guess on the
Well,
from a mobile.
There you go. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that. I mean, it sounds very sci-fi, but I actually do really think that the augmented reality side of things is going to be here not too long from now. And so you have more of a hands. I mean, there's different things where here you have a very direct method that gives input, and it's very reassuring. In augmented reality, there has to be some sort of controller element to it. But the persistency of the world to design for an overlay to the real world, if we do in fact leap into a space where not everybody's looking down at their phones constantly and they're able to keep their head up, I think it's a whole different way of looking at it.
Which then sort of like, which I agree, but it's sort of like you still have that barrier looking at it through the phone to create that augmented. So then it goes into kind of like glasses of some sort. Maybe it's going to be this like, you know, and everyone's obviously exploring that, but it seems like that's first pathway. Yes, there is that sort of barrier of a new piece of technology, but it seems like that allows for everything to create like that first level of immersion. Because it's still that kind of challenge right now, again, seeing it through a screen.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to wrap up there. That's a very interesting way to end it. Lots of kind of big ideas there. So thanks very much to the panel for taking the time today. That was really fascinating. And I think if anyone has any more questions, I don't know if all of you will be over in the Discords, or can just get in touch with you, I guess, through LinkedIn or email. We can do it that way. But yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. And Craig, really well moderated. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, and thanks everyone. Neil, Ken, Erinrose, Joseph, fantastic stuff. Round of applause on behalf of all the people in the audience who you can't hear. Really great panel. Appreciate it. Yeah, with all of these things, I'm loving these topics we're discussing at Beyond Games. I feel like any one of these panels could last for a couple of hours, right? And we've only just scratched the surface of Star Trek and the Orville in the chat thread there. I'm happily convene a whole panel about that. So we are going to have to wrap up there, unfortunately, for the morning. I appreciate it. What a great way to end this morning's sessions. Thanks, folks.